Okay, if you're watching this, you're working on the current Photoshop Sunset assignment, and you might just be looking for an intro or something. A few things that I'm going to be referencing throughout this entire lesson are the slide here called Photoshop Sunset. So it also talks you through the steps that I'm going to be doing. I probably won't show this again. The other thing that I will be referencing are the criteria. So if you're in my class, again, realize that there's criteria attached to this, and there's also an A+ level criteria. And finally, another thing that you'll hear me say is all the keyboard shortcuts and a variety of things that I'm doing. If you ever need to see those, you can go to my website, and it says for Photoshop shortcuts and selection tool help, you can click on this document and it will open up a PDF of a whole bunch of shortcuts. These are the main ones that I'll be referencing up here as far as keyboard shortcuts go. So on that note, we're going to start the assignment. And let's go ahead. So I'm going to open up Photoshop. You can always pause this video if you ever want to. So I'm going to open up Photoshop right here and click on File, New. Sorry. Yeah, so click on File, New. It specifically says for this assignment to make it exactly 1200 by 800 pixels. So make sure your units are pixels. The width is 1200, the height is 800. You don't have to worry so much about anything else at this particular moment unless you want to edit it for your personal well-being. So that's a 1200 by 800 pixel, yeah, basically a background that I want to work on here. Next, I'm going to work on some custom sunset colors. What you're going to use is the gradient tool. So the gradient tool is right here. And the colors, you can see that if I drag my mouse right now, I kind of have like a light to a dark yellow-ish color. That's because that's the colors that are selected at this particular moment in my Photoshop. If you'd like to change those, you can double-click and you'll get this gradient editor. And don't choose any of these presets. They don't look nice for custom colors, but what you can see is if you drag, so don't use these colors, if you drag a long line diagonally, it will be a slow fade, or vertically vice versa. So you can play around with that. But to change the colors, you would click on these stops at the bottom of your gradient. So these stops will open up a color picker, which then allows you to choose hue. I'm going to choose some sort of like a, I don't know, a light teal color, 2A, and if you double click on this gradient color picker, I'm going to go to kind of a dark purple. Now if you would like, you want to be a little bit careful about this, but if you would like to, so that's going to be my sunset colors. You can add middle colors as well. If you double click underneath the gradient here, you can add other colors. So if I wanted like a deep or a light pinkish color in the middle, I could do that. So now it's going to go from a teal to a light pink to a purple. I'm going to delete that, so I'm going to select it and delete the pink and maybe put in the teal color again. Okay, so that's sort of where I'm at. So this is my gradient, and I'm going to make my gradient teal at the bottom to the deep purple at the top. And you can play around with that as much as you want to. The next thing I'm going to do, once I'm happy with the background, looks like an actual sunset that might be realistic, I'm going to create some more layers. So the layers, new layers button is down at the bottom right, and you can rename them by double clicking on the name. So I'm going to name it grass. I'm going to, I believe the next layer we want it to call sunshine. The next layer we would like to call cloud, which we may or may not use. Okay, so once you've created those, we are going to install the grass brush. So there's a paintbrush tool here in Photoshop, and typically if you open up Photoshop for the first time, the grass brush is not one that is open or even selectable. So you have to go to the settings. So right beside the brush size, you go to the settings wheel and click on legacy brushes, and you would get a different pop-up than this perhaps, but yeah, you want to install legacy brushes, which will allow you then, and probably your menu will look a little bit shorter than this, perhaps like this, that will create a folder called legacy brushes. I like to drag mine tall and skinny. You can see I've got 2 legacy brushes, but you'll have one, and legacy, the actual grass tool or grass brush is in the legacy brushes and default brushes folder. Now when you open up legacy brushes, default brushes, about 2/3 of the way down roughly, there's 2 brushes either called grass or dune grass. So I'm just going to select grass, and as you can see, I've got grass. Now it's green in my case because I've chosen a primary color of green, a foreground color of green, and a background color of darker green. Okay, and it will always be a variation of your foreground and background colors. I'm going to undo this by selecting Control-Alt-Z, and you can change the size. If you use the keyboard shortcut, it's the 2 keys beside the letter P on your keyboard, and that can change the size of your grass. Okay, this is evidently way too large. So what I'm going to do is make this a decent size, so nice and relatively small. And I'm going to choose maybe almost black, but again, be creative, do what you'd like to do. So I'm going to choose a really dark green, as well as for my background color, maybe even darker, like almost black. I'm going for a nearly dark out kind of look here. So this is the color. Now I'm making one mistake here. Some of you might notice this. My mistake here is that I'm in the wrong layer. So make sure that if you are painting grass, you're on the grass layer. Photoshop, the power of Photoshop partially is in your ability to create and work in layers. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. So if you made a mistake, you can either Control-Alt-Z until you undo that mistake, or start over. You can delete layers by dragging them into the garbage if you like down here. But a variety of things you can do. So I'm going to go in the grass layer, and I didn't like the color of that grass, so I think I'm going to go a little bit more with a almost. Yeah, so this is a weird mode. So the reason that this is happening to me, it probably won't happen to you, is I think because my opacity is at 40%. Okay, so you can always investigate stuff up here. Generally the default will be good, so if I go to opacity of 100, I should then, yeah, so there you see, I've got some straight up black grass. So I'm going to go back to my dark green and black. So here's my dark green mixed with my black. That looks pretty nice. This is really nearly, and I've had students make hills out of grass. They can change the size, a variety of things. So make sure your grass is nice and solid. It fills in your space. I'm just doing a simple sunset, so please be as creative as you'd like to. So some students who create background hills might create another layer called hill, might choose, because maybe the sun is on it a little bit more, might choose a slightly lighter color green, make it a little bit smaller in the background, and then they start painting like a beautiful hill of some sort in the background. Okay, so you can see maybe on your screen this is a little bit lighter, so I've got a hill to place something on. Again, this is completely up to you. As you can see, my hill is behind that foreground grass. If yours appears to be in front, again, that has to do with the layers that you're in. So you can always drag. So if I want my hill in front, I can do that, but I don't like that. I like the foreground grass in front of the hill, and there's kind of my basic grass here. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I've created grass. You can play around with that as much as you'd like to. Is start to work on my sunshine. So again, I'm going to select the correct layer. If you continue to work in the same layer, you're going to have to restart this assignment. One of the criteria has you to just use different layers in order to do this. So what I'm going to do next is pull out not my grass brush. I'm going to pull out my simplest soft round brush. Actually, I'll do that in my general brushes, my soft round brush. So you can see right now I've got a green sunshine, which I don't want. I'm going to choose a yellow sunshine. That's the color that I want for my sun. And please don't draw a circle for your sun. It won't be accurate. So what we're going to do in this scenario is make it approximately the size of the sunshine that we like. So you can see if I start clicking, there's a sun. Now the problem in this scenario is that the sun is in front of the grass. So you can see in the layers here, we can deal with those layers. So I'm going to drag the sunshine below the grass. And I'm also noticing that my sun doesn't really have a slightly hard edge to it. So you can play around with that as much as you like. What I'm going to do is go up to the settings of that brush and increase the hardness. Not to 100. If I had a 100 hardness, it would look more like a moon. So I'm going to reduce my hardness to whatever I choose. Whatever you think looks nice to you. I'll go with 57% here. And there we go. I've got a nice beautiful sun with a slightly hard edge, and it's looking pretty good here. So the next step just has to do with adding clouds, adding some extra features that you might like. So I'll just do that pretty quickly here. With the clouds, if you'd like to have a cloud layer, you could just use a paintbrush. I would use a pretty soft brush, probably a whitish type of color, and you're more than welcome to kind of paint those on. Okay, so this is more of like a puffy cloud. You could also do a Google search. So I've had students in the past do Google searches for clouds. So just ensure that if you're doing a Google search for clouds, that you are making sure your tools are large clouds, and your color in this case has to be transparent. The reason being, we need to be able to see the background through it. So perhaps this one will work. So you could try and download this. In fact, I can just really quickly show you how that would come in, and we'll see if it'll work. So this will actually allow me to teach you 2 ways to bring in an image. So the 2 ways to bring in an image are either dragging it from your file explorer. If you do that, what you will see, and I'll just delete my other cloud, what you'll see is it creates its own layer. Okay. If you want to move it, you can. So I'm using the move tool. If you want to resize it, you want to make sure you show your transform controls, because you'll get those little tools on the side here, and you can hold down shift to make sure that it stays to scale. So if I hold down shift and I drag, I can change the size of my cloud. This cloud appears pretty see-through, but that's one thing that you can do. So you can bring in clouds from Google if you like. Again, I'm going to go back and just really briefly just kind of put in a fluffy cloud. One of the criteria talks about making the cloud slightly see-through, and that has to do with changing the opacity of that layer. So if I go, and I created that cloud not in a cloud layer, so I'm going to have to create a new cloud layer. But regardless, is when you've created your cloud or your several clouds, or whatever it happens to be, you can lower the opacity of that layer. So make sure that layer is selected, and lower the opacity and make it slightly see-through. So you can see that my cloud is now slightly see-through with the sun. So my last thing I'm going to do is add my name, add a couple of images, and I'll just show you how that works. So what I have here, I've got an image of a girl and a tree I'd like to bring in. Again, with Google searches, I've made sure that I've searched for large as well as transparent images, and you'll see sometimes it doesn't work. If you've got a thumbnail, you can't save thumbnails very well. So I think the one that I saved was this one here, and this will work decently well. So 2 ways to bring in images. One way is in Photoshop. You can select File, Open, and search for the image. And it will open the image in a new window. You can see here there's 2 tabs. So what I can do in that scenario is copy the image. So I'm going to use my marquee tool and drag a box over the whole image and press Control-C to copy, go to my other image, and Control-V to paste. You'll see that it's incredibly large. So if I use my move tool, I can make it, depending on the resolution, is the size that it will be. Okay, so that's my tree. That's one way to bring an image, is go to File, Open, and open the image. I'm just going to change the so there's my tree. Hit the check mark, change the name of that layer to tree, and drag it behind the hill. So if I take that, you can see I want it hidden behind the hill. It's also hidden behind the clouds now, which isn't ideal, so my cloud should probably be back here. So you can play around with your layers to make this look good. The second way to bring in your image is just open up your File Explorer and drag it in. Then it will create its own layer in that document that's already there. They have advantages at different times. So I'm going to shrink down this girl. Again, if you don't hold down Shift while resizing, you can make them really oversized and not great, right? So what I'm going to do, just bring her back in, is with my move tool. With my move tool and my transform controls selected, I can hold down Shift on my keyboard and resize her to scale, and maybe she's hanging out under the tree or something. Okay, so there's that little girl. Okay, so she is behind the tree. I can hit the check mark here. I can, if I'd like to, call it girl, and there we go. Okay, so this looks half decent. I've got somewhat of a decent sunset. Many of you will create more beautiful ones than this. Lastly, to add my name, you can just click on the typing tool. Don't drag a text box, it's very restrictive. Okay, so just click, type your name. Okay, if you'd like to change the size or anything like that, you can select the name after you've typed it, or you can change all this stuff before and change the size, change the font. Maybe I'll go with some sort of, I don't want to take too long. You can play around with this as much as you want to. Change the size. Change the color. Maybe I'll make my color just straight up white. and you can use the move tool to move it. You can see it's hidden behind, so you can see it's not actually there. If I drag that onto the top layer, you'll see it. And other things you can do if you'd really like to is play around with something called FX. So FX here, again, you don't have to, but if you open up FX, you can add effects to your name, like, for example, a stroke around it, which is an outline, and you play with all the features. You can play around with all of these that you like to. There's so much you can do, but I'll just change mine to red so you can see it. I don't like the color scheme here, but this just shows you kind of all the things that you can choose to do with your name. You could add things like shadows, etc. So all those things are up to you. Okay, so that's the assignment. I'd also suggest that you hand it in as a Photoshop file. So you'll go to Save As, and save it as a Photoshop file and hand that in. Okay, that is it.